But first, let's talk a little Saints because we are here on the cusp of the NFL playoffs. We are here on the cusp of Saints Bears Part 2, and it's kind of a fascinating matchup. If for no other reason than the starting point where these two teams played during the regular season, and they went to overtime. Saints had a big lead late. They blow the 10-point lead. They end up having to win on a field goal with a couple minutes left in OT. So it was a tough-fought game, and yet here the Saints sit, and they are 9-point favorites, the largest spread of any matchup in the playoffs. Another reason why getting that second seed is I wouldn't lose too much sleep over the one seed. You got as favorable a first-round matchup as you're going to find. I would probably even rather play the Bears than I would the Washington football team right now. And so I guess I'm trying to explore, okay, how is it that the first game ended so close, and how is it that we expect the second game to not be that close? And I think there's also this element of fear that Saints fans are dealing with where how could you not have some form of sporting PTSD with how the Saints have exited the playoffs the last 3 years, right? There's the Minnesota Miracle, where you had one of the greatest comebacks in playoff history on the road, only for it to evaporate on one of the longest odd plays you've ever seen. There was the Nola no call, which through no fault of their own, the Saints end up losing that NFC championship. And now, oddly enough, people don't really care anymore. Now it's just viewed as like a Sean Payton failure, at least for the people who are going after Payton. And then, of course, there's last year's Minnesota game, which is where maybe the main fear comes from, where there were a lot of similarities between Saints Bears this year and Saints Vikings last year, in that you seem to be better in every facet of the game. That seemed like a team that you would just roll through and move on to the next round. So how is it that there's such a disparity between how the first game played out and how we're predicting? And I think, look, I think one of the main reasons is that first game was in Chicago, outside, inclement weather. Remember, on New Orleans Football, Nick Underhill had some great breakdowns on how Sean Payton's play calling was literally changing based on which direction they were going, right? He was more conservative going into the wind, letting it fly a bit more with the wind at his back. And these are all elements that will not be in play in the Superdome, right? That is a place where Drew Brees is completely comfortable. The offense will be, and Sean Payton can have that full playbook at his disposal. I think the other big factor is that you're probably, for the first time, like we talked about with Nick, you're going to be dealing with a Saints team that is finally at its full potential. And so then when you start to look at this game on paper and you start to find, okay, who has the edge? And Jeff Duncan did this in The Athletic. But like you go down matchup by matchup. So running backs versus linebackers, the two quarterbacks compared to each other, Saints defensive line, Bears offensive line. At every single matchup, the Saints have the advantage. Maybe the one area in which it's a bit different is that the Bears kicker Cairo Santos, shout out Tulane, has actually been a bit better than Will Lutz this season. But even that, like if that's your weakness, you'll take that, right? Like I know Will Lutz has had a little bit of speed wobbles lately, but if push comes to shove, I trust in Lutz. I tried something there, it didn't work. The point is I trust Lutz, right? Even with some of the recent struggles. And so if you have an advantage at every single position group on the field, and then you look at Sean Payton versus Matt Nagy, which you have to feel like is maybe one of the biggest advantages that you have, then that's how you see that 9-point spread come about, even with how that first game played out. And I want to talk about Sean Payton because his legacy stands to either benefit a ton or maybe lose a little bit of luster based on how this playoff run goes. Because if you get Alvin Kamara and Mike Thomas back, which it sounds like you're going to, and at full strength of that, there is zero excuse to lose this game. I mean, we've spent this entire season praising Sean Payton. I mean, just yesterday, Underhill on New Orleans Football brought up how this may be the best coaching job of his entire career. Now, all that said, as we alluded to, sometimes when you bring up Payton, the people who want to, kind of take away from his accomplishments will point to the playoff losses and say, well, there was no way that you should have lost to the Vikings team last year, and yet you did. Sean Payton cannot get it done in the playoffs. Now, I would look at Sean Payton's playoff record, and you see that it's a winning record, and so I don't think that holds a lot of water, but that's still the point that people are going to try to make when they try to detract from him. So when you look at this matchup, and you look at a Bears team that has struggled for the vast majority of the year, you are very good defensively. I mean, and look, maybe like, well, T-Bob, what went wrong in the Vikings game last year? The defensive line just whooped the Saints O-line's ass. And this Bears team, they have Khalil Mack, they have Robert Quinn, they have Akeem Hicks. Like, are they going to whip the Saints' ass again? But then you look at the numbers. Those are big names. But look at the numbers. They're 17th in sacks, 17th in QB hit percentage, 21st in pressures per game, 19th in hurries per game. So they haven't been great. In fact, they've actually been right below average. And so I don't see that same thing playing out that you saw with Danielle Hunter and that Vikings defensive line last year. So I guess the bottom line point of all of this is to say that I don't know that that first game has much bearing on this one, given the change in settings and the change of personnel and the Saints getting healthy. And since the Saints are healthy and at home and significantly better than their opponent, there is no excuse for the Saints to lose this game. This is a matchup that they should be happy about. It's a matchup where you have to go and take care of business, and then you move on to taking care of business the next week. And I know the NFL can get wonky, but the great teams are better than wonky, and I think that's what this Saints team can be. Again, 12-4 with Mike Thomas, Alvin Kamara, and Drew Brees only playing 10 quarters together. Do we finally see that untapped potential that we've been referencing for the last couple of weeks? I like this on the outside, and we'll continue to talk about it throughout the week. Okay, so when we get back, let's go around the NFL. Maybe we can save this Alvin Kamara for MVP conversation for a bit later. We'll see. We got some mailbag potentially coming up, and we'll see where if Will Guillory or Andrew Lopez wakes up. Tweet them and tell them to wake up. So off the bench, OTBOT here on 104.5 ESPN. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, go ahead and like and subscribe below. You want more great Saints content? We got it all here on Off the Bench Overtime. Check out these other videos, share with your friends, and let's grow the Who Dat Nation together. Who Dat?